Alien scientists freaked watching human railgun technology. Part 5. Respect earned. 3 weeks passed. The diplomatic meetings continued. On the surface, nothing had changed. Vale sat across from Doyun every morning. Rima worked with Bomi on a shared science project comparing human and Velhari approaches to material stress testing, which Rima had suggested, and which Bomi had accepted immediately with visible excitement. Nara remained on the ship, working through data quietly, filing smaller update reports to the Council every few days. But underneath all of it, something had shifted. It was not visible in anything the Velhari said or did. They were careful about that. But Vale noticed it in himself. A change in how he looked at the humans when they walked into a room. He had arrived at Earth, expecting to evaluate a young species. He had arrived with the easy confidence of an experienced scientist who had done this 12 times before and knew what to look for. He had arrived, if he was being honest with himself, with a certain amount of comfortable superiority. The Velhari were older, they were further along, they had more knowledge and more history and more experience of the universe. All of that was still true. And yet, he watched Harry walk into the meeting room one morning carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one unprompted for Rima, because she had noticed Rima always seemed to want something worn in her hands during long sessions. He watched Doyun manage a difficult moment when one of the human government representatives got aggressive in a meeting, calming the situation with 3 quiet sentences and a look. He watched Bomi stay 2 hours late to finish helping Rima translate a set of material science documents, not because she was asked to, but because she wanted to get it done properly. These were not the actions of a civilization that was dangerous because it was wild or reckless. These were the actions of people who were competent and deliberate and committed to whatever they were doing. The railgun was not an accident. It was not luck. It was the result of a species that decided it wanted something and then worked steadily and intelligently until it had it. And when it had it, it kept going. The High Council's formal response arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. It came as an official diplomatic communique addressed to the Human Joint International Delegation, routed through Vale as the Velhari senior representative on Earth. He read it before passing it on. It was 5 pages. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. The tone, compared to the initial communications 3 weeks ago, was different in a way that Vale suspected the humans would not fully notice, but which meant a great deal in Velhari diplomatic terms. 3 weeks ago, the Velhari had communicated with Earth the way a professor communicates with a student, polite, informative, gently evaluating. The new communique communicated with Earth the way one institution communicates with another institution that it considers an equal, worth engaging with seriously. The Council was proposing a formal summit, a proper one, not a first contact courtesy meeting, but a structured technology exchange discussion between 2 civilizations. They named areas of mutual interest. They proposed specific formats. They offered to host a Velhari delegation on Earth and to send a human delegation to the Velhari homeworld. They also, notably, did not mention the railgun at all. Not once. To mention it would be to admit they had been shaken by it, and the Council did not admit things like that in writing. But Vale knew, and Nara knew, and anyone who read between the lines would know. The proposal for a serious diplomatic and scientific summit had not been on the table 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, the Velhari plan had been a brief first contact visit, a friendly exchange of basic information, and a polite withdrawal. Young civilizations were interesting, but they were not priorities. Earth was now a priority. Vale delivered the communique to Doyen personally. He handed the printed document across the table and sat back and waited while Doyen read it. Doyen read carefully and without rushing. When he finished the first page, He passed it to an aide, who immediately took it to make copies for the rest of the human team. Doyen continued reading. When he finished, he set the document down and looked at Vale. "This is a significant offer," Doyen said. "The Council considers Earth a significant partner," Vale said. Doyen nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was always quiet when he was choosing his words. "3 weeks ago," he said, "the tone of your communications was different." Vale met his eyes. Yes, something changed. It was not a question. Vale appreciated that. He appreciated that Doyen was not pretending not to notice, and was not going to make Vale pretend either. "You showed us something at the coastal facility," Vale said. "It prompted a more thorough review of your technological development." "The railgun," Doyen said. "Yes." Doyen was quiet again. "Very simply, it's not even the most advanced version." Hearing it confirmed still produced a particular feeling that he did not have a good word for in his own language. Something between respect and the careful, measured alertness of a person who has just realized the room they are standing in is much larger than they thought. "I assumed as much," Vale said, which was only partly true. Harry came in from a side door at that point, carrying her flat device, and moving with her usual purposeful energy. She looked at the document on the table, picked it up, and started reading. She got through 2 pages faster than most people read 2 paragraphs. "Summit," she said. "Formal exchange." She looked up at Vale. "Are they offering engineering data, material science, propulsion systems?" "That would be discussed at the summit itself," Vale said. "The specific content of exchanges would be negotiated. And in return they want—" She was already back to reading. "Cooperation on research that benefits both civilizations." Harry set the document down. She looked at Doyen. Something passed between them quickly, the kind of look that people share when they have worked together long enough to have a shorthand. Doyen gave a small nod. Harry turned back to Vale. "We're open to the summit," she said. "But we'll want to be specific about what goes on the table." She picked up her coffee. "We're not sharing the railgun specifications." She said it the same way Doyen had said everything. Simply, without posturing, without aggression. Just a statement of fact. This is where we stand. No apology for it, no performance around it. Just the line, stated clearly. Vale nodded. Understood. Rima, who had come in during the last part of the conversation, sat down next to Bomi. Bomi was already writing notes on her translation tablet, preparing to document the response. She was writing fast and smiling slightly, the way she always did when things were progressing. Vale looked around the room. The humans on one side, the Velhari on the other. A table between them, and on the table, an offer from a civilization that had crossed the stars to meet them, and found, somewhat to their own surprise, that they needed to sit down at that table as equals, and be careful about what they asked for. Later, after the meeting, Vale walked back to the shuttle alone. The evening air was cold, and the sky was clear. Stars were appearing, one by one, in the dark above the city. He stood outside the shuttle for a moment, and looked up at them. He had visited 12 planets. He had evaluated 12 civilizations. He had filed 12 reports that all said, in their different ways, the same comfortable thing. Young species, early stage, non-threatening, observe and catalog. His report on Earth was going to be different. He thought about what Nara had said. Every answer they get produces 3 more questions, and they chase all of them at the same time. He thought about a 10-kilogram piece of engineered alloy vanishing from the end of a barrel before his sensors could fully register it. He thought about Harry's eyes when she watched the impact column rise from the sea, not with awe, but with the focused, calculating look of someone already thinking about what they would change in the next version. He thought about what it meant that they called it a research project. The Velhari had been traveling the stars for 800 years. They had built an empire of knowledge that spanned dozens of systems. They were patient and methodical and very, very good at knowing what was coming next. But they had looked at electromagnetic acceleration 3 centuries ago and written 40 pages of theory and moved on. The humans had looked at it and built the thing. Vale got into the shuttle. He was not afraid of the humans. Fear was not the right word for what he felt. The right word was something closer to respect. Genuine, earned, unambiguous respect, mixed with the particular alertness of a person who has just realized they are sharing the galaxy with something that does not stop moving forward. He filed his personal notes for the night as the shuttle lifted off and the lights of the city shrank below him. His last line read, "They did not reach for the stars with patience or theory. They reached with velocity and stubbornness and a refusal to accept that something could not be done." The Velhari would do well to remember that, now and in every conversation that follows. He closed the file. Below him, Earth turned in the dark, full of light, full of noise, full of people who were already building the next version of everything. H1. Alien scientists freaked watching human railgun technology. H2. Part 4. The Quiet Fear. The response from the High Council came in 48 hours. That was fast. The Council rarely responded to anything in less than a week. They were a body of 11 senior figures who preferred to read, discuss, review, consider, rediscuss, and then take another day before deciding anything. They had been governing Velhari science and expansion policy for over 2 centuries, and they had built a reputation for careful, slow decisions that almost never went wrong. 48 hours was not careful. 48 hours was not slow. When the priority response signal came through, Vale and Rima were eating in the ship's small common room. Vale set down his food and went to the communication room immediately. Rima followed 1 step behind him. The message opened with a text header that was usually used only for active crisis situations. Below it was a short audio message from Counselor Inho, the senior member of the Science and Defense Committee. Inho was an old Velhari, older than most members of the Council, with a reputation for being impossible to impress. He had reviewed first contact reports from over 30 civilizations across his career. He had once read a report about a species that had figured out faster-than-light travel on accident, and responded with a single calm memo asking for more details. His voice in the audio message was not calm. He was not panicking. Velhari did not panic. It was considered deeply embarrassing, but there was a tightness in his words that Vale recognized immediately. It was the voice of a person who had read a report, checked the numbers, found the numbers to be real, and was now trying to figure out what to do next, without letting it show too much on his face. He said the sensor data had been reviewed by 3 separate analysis teams. He said all 3 teams had confirmed the numbers. He said the Council was sending their weapons analyst, a person named Nara, to the ship immediately, via fast courier, to assist with further assessment. Nara would arrive within 6 days. He said Vale was to continue the diplomatic contact with the humans as normally as possible, and not change any behavior in a way that might signal concern. The message ended. Rima looked at Vale. Vale looked at the communication screen for a moment, then turned it off. "They're sending Nara," Rima said. "Yes," Vale said. "Nara hasn't left the homeworld in 11 years. I know. They did not need to say anything more. If the Council was sending Nara to the ship in person, instead of handling the analysis remotely, it meant the Council considered the situation serious enough to need their best weapons expert physically present. Nara had spent her career studying weapons technology across known civilizations, tracking development rates, identifying danger thresholds, building models that predicted how fast a species would advance from one technological level to the next. She was very good at her job. She was also not the kind of person you sent anywhere unless you were genuinely concerned. Vale returned to his diplomatic duties the next morning as if nothing had happened. He met with Doyan and the human delegation team in the white building with the tall windows. They discussed potential areas of knowledge exchange. The humans had many questions about Velhari medicine, Velhari material science, and Velhari space navigation. They were curious and organized and prepared. They brought experts to every meeting, and those experts had very specific, detailed questions that were not the questions of people just beginning to think about science. Harry came to 2 of the meetings. She sat at the side of the room with her flat device and mostly listened, but twice she asked questions that stopped Vale completely. Not because they were aggressive questions, because they were exactly the right questions, the kind that showed she already understood most of the answer, and just wanted the last piece. Vale answered them carefully. He was not trying to hide anything. The Velhari did not typically practice information deception during first contact. It was considered a bad foundation for any long-term relationship. But he was very aware, in those moments, that he was talking to someone whose mind worked very fast. 6 days passed. Nara's courier ship arrived and docked. She came aboard with 2 assistants and a large amount of data equipment. She was shorter than most Velhari, with sharp eyes that moved constantly, and a way of walking that suggested she was always already thinking about the next room she was going to enter. She greeted Vale briefly, said hello to Rima, and went directly to the data room and asked for everything. Vale gave her everything. He did not see her for 20 hours. When she came out of the data room, she looked like someone who had spent 20 hours looking at something they would have preferred not to see. She sat down in the common room, and Vale brought her something warm to drink and sat across from her and waited. I pulled every intercepted human communication signal we have access to, she said, speaking without any greeting or warm-up. Military, technical, governmental. Everything we picked up during approach and during the stay in orbit. I cross-referenced it with the sensor data from the Railgun demonstration and added in the secondary electromagnetic signatures your ship detected from other ground locations. Vale nodded. They have at least 4 operational facilities working on electromagnetic acceleration technology. The one you visited is the most advanced. The others are at earlier stages. But here is what concerns me. She put down her drink. I built a development timeline. I tracked when certain signals first appeared, when they changed in strength and frequency, how the power requirements shifted over the years. I mapped it against the rate of change in their ground communication systems and their orbital technology. She paused. The rate of advancement is not slowing down. It is accelerating. Every generation of this technology arrives faster than the last one. Vale absorbed this. How fast? Fast enough that in 10 years at the current rate, they will have versions of this weapon that their naval vessels can carry. 20 years after that, if they follow the logical development path, they will have ship-to-ship versions, in space. The room was quiet. And that is before we talk about the other military programs, Nara said. They have many. Some of them I can follow. Others use technologies I don't fully recognize yet, which concerns me more than the ones I can follow. Rima, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke. What do we tell the council? Nara picked up her drink again. I will tell them the truth, that this species has been on their planet for about 200,000 years, that they have had modern science for about 400 years, that they have had electrical power for about 150 years, and that in that time, they have built machines that can punch through the hull of one of our warships using nothing but copper rails and a power cable. She looked at Vale. I will also tell them that these people appear to have no intention of going anywhere except forward. They do not slow down. They do not stop to rest on what they've already achieved. Every answer they get seems to produce 3 more questions, and they chase all of them at the same time. Vale thought about Harry in the meeting room, asking the exact right question. He thought about Bomi running around after Rima, absorbing information as fast as it could be given to her. He thought about Doyen saying, "We'd be happy to show you," with the easy confidence of someone who already knew what they were showing was enough. There is one more thing, Nara said. I looked at the material composition of the railgun projectile in the sensor data. The metal they used is an alloy. It is specifically engineered to survive the acceleration forces inside the barrel without deforming. So, somebody sat down and designed it. They did not just take an existing metal and fire it. They created a new material to solve a specific problem. That kind of engineering thinking, recognizing a problem, designing a material solution at the atomic level, is not something we expected from them at this stage. She looked at her drink. It should have taken them another 50 years to develop that level of materials engineering. They did it in 12. The report Nara filed to the High Council was 14 pages long. Vale read it before she sent it. He did not suggest any changes. In the council chambers back on the homeworld, in a large round room where decisions about other civilizations had been made for 200 years, a group of 11 very experienced people read those 14 pages. Counselor Inho asked for the weapons assessment summary to be read out loud to the full chamber, which was unusual. And when it was done, the room was very quiet for a long time. It was the kind of quiet that only happened when everyone in the room was thinking the same thing, and nobody wanted to say it first. Alien scientists freaked watching human railgun technology. Part 3. The numbers don't lie. The ship was quiet when Vale and Rima returned to it that evening. The rest of the crew were in their rest periods. The corridors were dim and cool, the way the Velhari liked them at night cycles. The only sounds were the soft hum of the life support system and the distant beep of the navigation monitors on the upper deck. It was the kind of quiet that was usually easy to work in. Tonight, it felt too quiet. Vale went straight to the data room. It was a small room near the center of the ship, lined on 3 sides with screens and panels, with a single low table in the middle. He sat down, connected his personal recorder to the main system, and began pulling up everything the ship's sensors had captured during the demonstration. Rima came in a few minutes later with 2 cups of warm liquid that the ship's kitchen produced as a rough substitute for a drink they both liked back home. She set one in front of Vale and sat across from him without speaking. She pulled up her own screen and started working. For the first hour, neither of them said anything. The data was all there. The sensors had recorded everything in detail. The energy buildup in the building connected to the gun, the magnetic field spike at the moment of firing, the speed and trajectory of the projectile, the impact data. Vale went through it all, piece by piece, slowly, the way he had been trained to approach anything that seemed too strange to be true. You looked at the numbers. You checked them against known values. You compared them to existing records. And, if the numbers still said the same thing after all of that, you accepted them. The numbers kept saying the same thing. Mach 6.1, to be precise. The sensors had captured the projectile in the first fractions of a second, and tracked it until impact. Mach 6.1, achieved in 0.4 seconds, by a 10-kilogram solid metal object, using nothing but electricity and magnetic force. No fuel, no combustion, no propellant of any kind, just power and physics. Vale put down his recording tool and looked at the ceiling. The energy numbers, Rima said from across the table. She wasn't asking a question. She already knew. I know, Vale said. I ran them 3 times. I ran them 4 times. Rima sat back. She held her cup in both hands. At that mass and velocity, the impact energy is approximately. I know what it is, Vale said quietly. The impact energy was enough to punch through the outer hull of a Velhari warship. That was not a guess. Vale had the hull specification data for Velhari military vessels in the ship's database. He kept it there because it was part of standard threat assessment protocol. When you visited a new civilization, you compared what their weapons could do against what your own ship could survive. It was basic procedure. It was something he had done 12 times before, on 12 different planets. And every single time, the answer had been comfortable. Every single time, the gap between what a young civilization could do and what a Velhari ship could survive had been enormous. Not tonight. The railgun projectile, at those numbers, would go through the outer hull of a Velhari warship. Through it, and depending on angle and placement, possibly through the inner structural layer as well. And this was a prototype. A test machine sitting on a concrete platform connected to temporary cables, built by a civilization that had only had electricity for about 150 years. Rima spoke again. They said they've been working on this program for how long? Vale checked his notes from the meeting. The humans have had theoretical work on electromagnetic acceleration for nearly a century. Active development of this specific system for about 15 years. Rima was quiet for a moment. 15 years. Yes. The Velhari Science Council studied electromagnetic acceleration 300 years ago, she said. They concluded the mechanical stress on the barrel structure made it impractical at high energy outputs. They wrote 40 pages of theoretical papers and then moved on. I know, I've read the papers. The humans apparently did not read the papers, Rima said. Vale almost smiled, which was rare for him. They did not. What the humans had done instead, what Harry and her team and the teams before them had done, was attack the problem from the engineering side instead of the theoretical side. When the barrel showed stress damage from the magnetic pulse, they did not conclude that the concept was impractical. They designed a better barrel. When the energy requirements exceeded what their power systems could manage, they did not conclude the scale was too great. They built better power systems. When the projectile itself couldn't survive the acceleration forces intact, they changed the material composition of the projectile. They had treated every obstacle as a problem to be fixed, rather than a reason to stop. Vale found this approach almost difficult to understand. The Velhari were patient and methodical. They studied, they theorized, they built models. They were very good at knowing in advance what would and would not work. It saved time. It was efficient. But the humans had done something the Velhari had not. They had built the thing anyway, failed, looked at the failure, and tried again. Then again. Then again. For 15 years. And now they had a machine that could fire a metal rod at Mach 6 using electricity. Vale pulled up another set of data on his screen. During the drive back from the facility, the ship's passive sensors had continued recording. They had detected similar electromagnetic signatures from at least 3 other locations on the planet's surface. The signatures were smaller, less powerful, which might mean smaller, earlier versions of the weapon, or it might mean miniaturized versions, reduced in size, made portable. He showed the data to Rima. She looked at it for a long time. Ship-mounted, she said. Possible. If they've reduced the power requirement enough to mount these on their naval vessels. I know. Rima set down her cup. She looked at him directly. Vale, we need to file a report. I know. Tonight. I know, Rima. He was already drafting it in his head. The report would go to the High Council through a priority channel. It would be flagged as significant. He tried to think about what words to use, how to describe what he had seen, in a way that would make the council understand what it meant, without sounding like he had lost his judgment. He decided to simply write the numbers. Numbers were hard to argue with. Rima went to her workstation on the other side of the room, and began putting together the sensor data package to attach to the report. She worked methodically, but faster than usual. Vale noticed she had not touched her drink, since he showed her the electromagnetic signatures from the other locations. He filed the report, just before the ship's night cycle ended. He attached all the sensor data, all the readings from the demonstration, all the numbers. He wrote a brief summary at the top that said, in plain language, "This civilization has developed kinetic delivery technology using electromagnetic principles. Current output exceeds structural tolerance of standard Velhari warship hull. This is a prototype. Development is ongoing. Recommend immediate upgrade of threat assessment classification. He sent it and sat in the dark data room for a while after. Outside the small porthole above the panel, the Earth turned slowly below them. Lights glittered across the dark side of the planet. Cities, coastlines, roads connecting everything together. All those lights, all those people below them. They had been burning things to move for most of their history. 150 years ago, they had discovered electricity. 15 years ago, they had started pointing magnetic force down a metal barrel and pulling a trigger. And they called it a research project. Vale looked at the lights for a long time. Then he got up, turned off the room screens one by one, and went to find some sleep, though he did not expect to find much of it. Alien scientists freaked watching human railgun technology. Part 2. The demonstration. The first 2 days on Earth were full of meetings. Vale sat through all of them with patience. He was good at patience. The humans brought representatives from many different groups, government officials, military personnel, scientists, and what appeared to be people whose only job was to write things down and take photographs. The meetings were held in a large white building with tall windows and many chairs. Humans seemed to like chairs. They sat in them constantly, even when the meetings were about things that did not require sitting. Rima enjoyed the meetings more than Vale did. She asked questions. She wanted to know about human biology, human history, human food. The humans answering her questions seemed pleased by her interest. A young analyst named Bomi, assigned to the science support team, had taken a particular liking to Rima and followed her around with a translation tablet, helping to bridge the gaps where the earpiece system struggled. Vale spent most of the meetings watching Doyen. The commander was a careful man. He listened more than he spoke. He chose his words with the kind of precision that told Vale he had been trained to think before saying anything. When Vale asked about Earth's military systems, a standard question in any first contact protocol meant to assess threat level and technological stage, Doyen had smiled and said something that the earpiece translated as, "We'd be happy to show you. We were actually planning to." That surprised Vale. Most civilizations at this stage were either eager to hide their weapons or eager to boast about them. Doyen was neither. He said it the way a person mentions the weather, like it was not a significant thing. Vale made a note of that. On the third morning, 2 large vehicles arrived outside the building, and the human team began loading equipment and personnel. Hari, the lead engineer, was organizing everything with quick movements and short instructions. She had spent the first 2 days mostly in the background, listening during meetings, looking at the Velhari with calculating eyes. Not hostile eyes, just the kind of eyes that were always measuring things. Doyen approached Vale and Rima as the loading was happening. "We'd like to take you somewhere," he said. "A coastal facility, about 2 hours from here. We have something we want you to see." "What kind of facility?" Vale asked. "Naval research and testing," Doyen said. "We'll show you one of our current development projects." Vale agreed. He was curious, though he kept his face neutral. Rima did not bother keeping her face neutral. She was already moving toward the vehicles. The drive took them through flat farmland, then through a smaller city, then along the coastal road, where gray water stretched out to the horizon on one side, and low concrete buildings sat on the other. The sky was overcast. The wind was strong. The air smelled like salt. Vale found it not unpleasant. The facility was large. High fences, security checkpoints, many uniformed personnel. But the humans moved through it all in a routine way, showing clearly that this was a normal place to them, not something staged for visitors. Several engineers waved at Harry as the vehicles passed. She waved back without slowing down. They were brought to an open area near the water's edge. A long concrete platform stretched toward the sea, and on that platform sat the machine. Vale stopped walking when he saw it. It was long, much longer than he had expected anything at this facility to be. The barrel, because that is what it clearly was, extended nearly 40 meters along the platform, supported by heavy metal frames at regular intervals. Thick cables ran from the base of it into a separate building nearby, a building that hummed with a low frequency Vale could feel in his chest. The whole device looked like it had been built by people who wanted to move something very fast and had decided that subtlety was not a priority. "What is this?" Vale asked. Harry stepped up beside him. She had a small device in her hand and was tapping on it. "Electromagnetic accelerator," she said. "We call it a railgun." Vale knew what electromagnetic acceleration was. Every advanced civilization knew the theory. You create a strong magnetic field, you use it to push a conductive object. The object moves. The Velhari had studied the concept 300 years ago and concluded it was theoretically interesting but practically useless for most applications, because the energy requirements were enormous, and the mechanical stress on any barrel structure was, at scale, nearly impossible to manage. He looked at the barrel. He looked at the cables. He looked at the humming building. "How fast does it accelerate the projectile?" he asked, mostly to be polite. Harry told him. Vale heard the number. He processed the number. He decided the translation system had made an error. "Could you repeat that?" he said. Harry repeated it. Rima made a small sound next to him that Vale had never heard her make before. He looked at her. Her large dark eyes were fixed on the barrel of the gun, and she had gone completely still. "That's," Rima started. "Mach 6, Harry said, anticipating the question. "In approximately 0.4 seconds from the moment of firing. The projectile weighs about 10 kilograms. Vale looked at Doyun. Doyun was watching him with that same calm expression he always wore. Not smiling, not proud, just watching. "We'd like to run a test while you're here," Doyun said, "if you're comfortable with that." Vale said he was comfortable. This was not entirely true. The human team moved with practiced speed. Personnel took positions. Screens lit up inside a nearby observation structure with reinforced glass. Harry spoke into a communication device. Somewhere in the humming building, energy was building. Vale's instruments were already picking it up. The readings were climbing in a way that made the sensors work harder to keep up. "You should watch the end of the barrel," Harry said, standing next to Vale behind a safety barrier, "not the target. You'll miss it if you look at the target." Vale kept his eyes on the end of the barrel. A count came over the communication system. 10 seconds. Then 5. Then a single word from Harry that the translation system rendered as "fire." What happened next lasted less than a second. There was a crack. Not an explosion. It was sharper than that, cleaner, like the air itself had been split open. A flash of light appeared at the end of the barrel, bright and brief, and then the projectile was gone. Not moving, not visible, just gone. The sea in the distance exploded in a tall white column of water, 250 meters from the shore, almost at the same instant. Almost. Not quite at the same instant, but almost. Vale stood very still. Rima had both hands pressed against the glass of her face shield. She turned to look at Vale, slowly. He could see in her expression that she was doing the same thing he was doing, running the numbers in her head. Speed, mass, distance, time. The numbers were not comfortable numbers. A projectile with that mass moving at that speed carried kinetic energy equivalent to... Vale stopped the calculation halfway through because the answer was making his hands feel strange. Doyen walked over and stood beside him, looking out at the water, where the column had already collapsed back into the sea. "Impressive," Vale said. He used the word carefully, the way you use a word when the real word you want does not exist yet. Doyen nodded. "We think it has some potential." Harry was already talking to her team, pulling up data on her screen, checking numbers with the focused expression of someone who was thinking about how to make it go faster next time. Rima leaned close to Vale and spoke quietly in their own language. Vale, she said. That was a research prototype. Vale had already understood that. He wished he hadn't. The drive back to the meeting building was very quiet. The humans did not seem to notice. Bomi sat next to Rima and talked cheerfully about the history of the facility and how long the Railgun program had been running. Rima listened and nodded at the right times. But her eyes were somewhere else. Vale stared out the window at the flat gray landscape and thought about the cables, the barrel, the building that hummed, and a single white column of water rising from a calm sea 250 meters away. He thought about the word prototype. He thought about it for a long time. H1. Alien scientists freaked, watching human railgun technology. H2. Part 1. First contact with the Iron World. The Velhari ship moved quietly through the dark between stars. It was a long vessel, smooth and silver, shaped like a curved blade. Inside, the halls were clean and calm. The air was cool. Everything was in order. The Velhari liked order. They had always liked order. It was one of the reasons they had survived so long and traveled so far. Scientist Vale stood at the front observation window and looked at the small yellow star growing slowly larger on the screen. He had light gray skin, 4 thin fingers on each hand, and large dark eyes that could read data faster than most machines on their homeworld. He had spent 40 years studying civilizations younger than his own. He had visited 12 planets. He had filed hundreds of reports. He had never once been surprised. He did not expect today to be any different. Behind him, his junior colleague Rima was already working. She was younger than Vale by about 20 years, which in Velhari terms meant she still had something called curiosity. She pressed her fingers against the sensor panel and pulled up everything the ship's computers had gathered about the third planet from the star, the blue and green one, mostly covered in salt water. The humans called it Earth. Interesting readings, Rima said, not looking up. Vale turned. What kind? Metal, a lot of it, structures everywhere. They've covered large parts of the land in hard materials. Stone, carbon compounds, processed iron. She paused. And heat, combustion heat. They burn things to move. Vale made a small sound that was the Velhari version of a tired sigh. So they discovered fire and found 1,000 ways to use it. Standard early development. What stage would you classify them? Rima looked at the data again. Hard to say. Their communication signals suggest fast information transfer. Their orbital zone has artificial objects, satellites, small machines in space. She tapped the panel again. And something else. Something else? Magnetic pulses, strong ones, coming from specific ground locations, cycling fast, very fast. She frowned. I don't have a classification for this type of emission. Vale walked over slowly and looked at the numbers himself. He studied them for a moment. Then he looked at Rima. Then he looked at the numbers again. Sensor error, he said. I recalibrated twice. Then interference, some natural geological source. Rima didn't argue. She had learned that Vale rarely changed his mind quickly. She simply saved the data and made a personal note to come back to it later. The ship entered the outer edge of the solar system. The humans had already detected them. Their radar systems were primitive but functional, and within hours of crossing the detection threshold, the planet below began generating stronger and more focused signals. They were being scanned. Vale found this mildly impressive. Most young civilizations took days to respond to an unknown object in their sky. These humans had responded in hours. A signal came through. Voice communication. Several languages at once. The Velhari translation system worked through them one by one, and built a basic language bridge in about 6 hours. By the time the ship was in stable orbit, Vale could understand roughly 80% of what the humans were saying. What they were saying mostly was, "Who are you? Where did you come from? And please confirm your intentions." Vale found this reasonable. He composed a response. He introduced the Velhari. He explained they were scientists and explorers. He said they came with no weapons ready and no harmful purpose. This was true, though the Velhari did have weapons. Every ship had weapons. It was simply common sense. But they were not pointed at Earth, and Vale felt this was the important part. The humans debated among themselves for 2 days. Vale and Rima watched the communication traffic with interest. The humans argued a great deal. Different groups had different opinions. Some wanted to welcome the visitors. Some wanted to fire missiles first and ask questions later. In the end, the welcoming side appeared to win, or at least to gain enough support to move forward. A response came from a group calling itself a Joint International Delegation. They invited the Velhari to make contact at a specific location on the planet's surface. They gave coordinates. They gave a time. They asked if the Velhari needed anything to survive in Earth's atmosphere. The Velhari could breathe Earth's air without assistance. It was slightly richer in certain gases than their home atmosphere, but not dangerously so. They would be fine. She thanked the humans for asking. "They asked about our comfort," Rima said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Politeness," Vale said. "Some species use it as a social tool. We use it too. We use it when we mean it. I'm still deciding if they mean it." The shuttle descended through the atmosphere 2 days later. Vale sat near the window and watched the planet rise up to meet them. It was loud from the outside. The air was thick and moved fast at certain altitudes, but the shuttle handled it without difficulty. Below them, the landscape changed from blue ocean to brown and green land. Then cities appeared. Even from high altitude, they were large, full of movement. Rima pressed her face closer to the window like a child, which Vale pretended not to notice. They landed in a wide open area, surrounded by low buildings and a lot of human personnel standing at a careful distance. The humans were shorter than the Velhari by about a head, softer looking, with rounded features and a wide range of skin shades. They stood very still as the shuttle door opened. Some of them had their hands clasped in front of them. Some had their hands behind their backs. A few had their hands near objects on their belts, which Vale recognized as weapons. He respected the honesty of that. 2 humans stepped forward from the group. One was a man in a dark military uniform. He had a steady walk and calm eyes. His name, Vale would later learn, was Doyen. Behind him came a woman in a gray technical jacket, carrying a flat device under one arm, looking at the Velhari shuttle with the expression of someone who had just been handed the most interesting puzzle of their life. Her name was Harry. She was the lead engineer assigned to the contact team. Doyun spoke first. The translation came through Vale's earpiece a half-second later. "Welcome to Earth," Doyun said. "We're glad you came in peace." Vale looked at the weapons on the belts of the people standing behind him, and found this statement almost funny. But he said nothing about that. He simply nodded, and introduced himself and Rima, and said that the Velhari were also glad. It was a polite beginning. What Vale did not know, what none of the Velhari knew yet, was that 200 kilometers away, along a gray stretch of coastline, a very large machine was sitting quietly, on a concrete platform, connected to thick cables, pointed toward the open sea. It was waiting. It was very good at waiting. And in 3 days, Vale would stand in front of it, and nothing about his understanding of this small blue planet would ever be the same again.